The bar went silent. The instant fabric ripped. A biker full of arrogance tore open a modest woman's shirt, expecting laughter. Instead, sunlight hit the ink beneath. An eagle globe and anchor. The Marine Corps tattoo didn't need words. It screamed of battle survived, of a warrior's unbroken spirit. Dice froze. Bottles stopped midair. Faces drained of color. For a heartbeat, the entire room bowed to a history carved into skin. But here's the truth. That tattoo was only the spark. Because somewhere in that bar, another symbol waited. A patch feared and respected across every highway in America. When it appeared, the room didn't just pause, it broke. This wasn't just humiliation turned upside down. It was a clash of legacies. The Marines' silent honor against the unstoppable loyalty of the Hells Angels. And in the middle, one woman who never asked to be a hero. What could silence an entire bar after a Marine tattoo lit it up? The answer ended everything. Stay with me. And if you believe loyalty can roar louder than violence, hit subscribe to Karen Tales. The silence in that bar wasn't natural. It was heavy, unnatural, like the air itself was holding its breath. The biker who torn her shirt, a man used to having a room bend under his laughter, suddenly looked small, like a boy who had just touched fire without knowing it would burn. And all eyes, every single one of them, were locked on her back on the emblem, inked into her skin that told a story far greater than this barroom scuffle. Her name was Clarara Hayes. To most of the people in that room, she was just a quiet woman who stopped by every now and then, who never raised her voice, who carried herself with a kind of humility you don't see often anymore. But to anyone who'd ever served, that tattoo meant something else entirely. It meant brotherhood, sacrifice, blood spilled on foreign soil. It meant she wasn't just another face in the crowd. And in that moment, the bar had to make a choice. Mock the ink or respect the weight behind it. What none of them realized was that the choice would never be theirs to make. Because fate was about to send someone else through those swinging doors. Someone whose very presence could end the night with a single glance. Clarara's story didn't begin in that bar. It began years earlier in the humid heat of Paris Island, where she had earned the right to wear that emblem. Back then, she was a wiry kid with sharp eyes and stubborn determination, outlasting recruits twice her size. She learned to keep marching when her legs felt like lead, to keep shooting, when her hands shook, to keep standing when the world wanted her down. That tattoo wasn't decoration. It was survival carved into flesh. But Clarara had left that life behind. After her enlistment ended, she slipped back into the world of ordinary people, working simple jobs, blending into crowds. She didn't tell war stories. She didn't brag about where she'd been. To her, being a Marine wasn't about ego. It was about carrying something quietly without ever needing to announce it. That night, she had only stopped at the bar on her way home from work. A quick drink, a chance to sit in the corner and gather her thoughts. She wasn't looking for trouble. She wasn't looking to prove herself, but trouble, as it often does, came looking for her. The biker who singled her out, his name was Travis Cole. He wasn't the leader of his crew, but he was the loudest. Big arms covered in cheap ink, a laugh that rattled glasses, a man who thrived on being noticed. And when Clarara ignored him when she sat quietly sipping her drink without giving him the attention he craved, that's when he snapped. He swaggered over, words slurred but sharp, mocking her modest clothes, her silence the way she didn't belong. And when she still didn't rise to the bait, when she kept her calm, he did what weak men do. He tried to humiliate her. With one rough motion, he tore through the back of her shirt, exposing what he thought would earn laughs from his friends. But instead, he exposed something that froze them all. For a long second after Travis ripped the fabric, no one moved. The jukebox in the corner still played faintly, but the melody felt wrong, almost mocking the stillness that had settled in. Clarara didn't flinch. She didn't cover herself in panic or scream. She simply straightened, squared her shoulders, and let the tattoo speak for her. The eagle globe and anchor stretched across her back weren't faded lines or drunken scribbles. They were bold, sharp, alive. That ink carried weight that most of the room couldn't comprehend. But among the patrons, there were two old men at the far end of the bar who knew exactly what it meant. They had served too, and when they saw it, they set their beers down with trembling hands. Eyes locked on Clarara with something between respect and guilt. Travis, drunk on his own bravado, didn't read the room. He laughed nervously, expecting his crew to join him, but his voice fell flat. His men glanced at each other, unsure. It wasn't just that the tattoo belonged to the Marines. It was the way Clara carried it, like someone who had lived through fire and come out tempered, not broken. "Looks like you're playing dress-up, lady." Travis sneered, trying to claw back control of the moment, but his words had no teeth. The silence was already betraying him. Clara turned her head slowly, eyes locking on his with a calm so cutting it felt like a blade. She didn't need to raise her voice. "You just picked a fight you don't understand." That was when the front door creaked open. A new group walked in. 3 men in leather vests, patches catching the low light. They weren't loud. They weren't even looking for trouble. But the moment the bar noticed the colors they wore, everything shifted again. Hell's Angels. The insignia stitched into their backs carried the same kind of gravity as Clara's tattoo. It was a symbol with a history, a reputation that stretched across highways, towns, and courtrooms. If Clara's tattoo was a warning, their patches were a promise. They hadn't seen what Travis had done. Not yet, they only saw the aftermath. The ripped shirt, the ink on Clara's back, the tense silence choking the room. And for a moment, even they stood still, reading the scene. Travis tried to mask his fear with a grin. "Brothers," he said too quickly, raising a hand. "Just a bit of fun. No harm done." But the angels didn't look at him. They looked at Clara at the tattoo, then at the 2 veterans still frozen at the bar, and something passed between them, a silent recognition that Travis couldn't begin to understand. Because loyalty recognizes loyalty, even when it comes from different worlds. The bartender swallowed hard, eyes darting toward the newcomers. The air buzzed with the kind of tension that precedes lightning. Clara, still calm, still unshaken, finally turned back to a drink, as if the storm brewing behind her wasn't her concern. But the truth was, the storm was coming, and Travis was standing dead center in its path. The bar wasn't built for silence, but that's exactly what filled it now. Every eye flicked between Clara's tattoo and the 3 Hell's Angels standing near the doorway. The men weren't in a rush. They didn't storm in with fists. Loyalty ended the fight in silence raised. Instead, they stepped forward with the kind of deliberate calm that made the walls feel tighter, the air heavier. Clara finally adjusted the torn fabric of her shirt, not to hide the tattoo, but to make sure it was seen. The eagle globe and anchor gleamed in the dim light. Travis's forced grin faltered as sweat broke at his temples. He had picked the wrong moment, the wrong target, and now even his crew began to step back, silently distancing themselves from his mistake. One of the angels, a tall man with a weathered face and arms covered in decades of ink, stopped at the center of the room. His patch carried the unmistakable red and white wings. He didn't need to say who he was. His presence announced it. He looked at Clara first, not at her torn shirt, not at her vulnerability, but at the ink. His eyes softened almost imperceptibly, then hardened again as they slid toward Travis. Who did this? His voice wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. Nobody answered. Nobody needed to. The way the crowd shifted, the way silence pointed like a finger made it clear. Travis cleared his throat, trying to laugh it off. It was nothing, just a joke. The angel's gaze didn't move. It pinned Travis like a spotlight, stripping away every layer of bravado he had built up over years of bullying. Finally, Clara's voice cut through the standoff. "This man thought it would be funny," she said plainly. He didn't know what he was tearing into. That single sentence lit the fuse. The second angel, younger, broad-shouldered, stepped closer until Travis had to tilt his head up to meet his eyes. "You touch a Marine like that in public." His tone was half disbelief, half contempt. The third angel, the quietest of the trio, finally moved. He leaned on the bar, tapping his finger against the wood. "You know what happens when someone disrespects loyalty in here?" The bartender flinched at the words, because he knew the answer better than Travis ever would. Clara stood her ground. She wasn't asking for revenge. She wasn't asking for protection. But the Hell's Angels weren't here to negotiate. They were here to draw a line. Travis's crew had already slipped toward the back, abandoning him in silence. Alone, cornered, he tried to stand taller, but it only made him look smaller. "Come on," he said weakly. "It was nothing. Look, she's fine." That was when the first angel stepped so close that their chests almost touched. "You tore her shirt," he said. "But what you really tore was your own luck." The bar collectively held its breath. Travis's world was shrinking by the second, pressed in by the Marine silent tattoo on one side and the Hell's Angels patch on the other. And this was only the beginning. The sound of boots scraping against the wooden floor echoed like drum beats of judgment. Travis tried to back away, but the angel in front of him matched every step. Behind them, Clara Ara remained still, her arms crossed, tattoo visible like she had nothing to prove anymore. The room had already decided where its loyalties leaned. The bartender cleared his throat nervously. Maybe let's just cool it down. The second angel turned his head slowly. One glance silenced the man. The weight of decades of unwritten law pressed on the bar like gravity. Nobody spoke against the angels when they'd already drawn a line. Travis swallowed hard, shifting his eyes between Clara Ara and the three men. I didn't mean disrespect. She's just some woman. I didn't know. The first angel cut him off, voice flat. She's not some woman. She's a Marine that means more than you'll ever understand. The words stung sharper than any fist. Around the room, men who had once laughed with Travis now shook their heads, muttering to themselves. Even those who weren't military knew the gravity of the tattoo on Clarara's skin. The younger angel cracked his knuckles, slow and deliberate. You know what's worse than being a coward? Being loud about it. Travis's throat bobbed as he searched for an escape. His crew, the ones he thought had his back, were gone, already out the door, hiding in shadows. All the noise that used to prop him up had vanished, leaving him alone in the glare of loyalty and power. Clara Ara's voice broke the tension again, calm but cutting. He doesn't need to understand. The bar already knows. It was true. Every pair of eyes avoided Travis now. No one willing to be seen on his side. His name had turned into a curse in the span of minutes. The third angel finally spoke, his tone quiet, almost surgical. A man like you thinks he owns a room by force. But tonight you'll learn what it means when loyalty owns the room instead. He turned slightly, and the back of his leather cut caught the light, the patch. Red and white wings curved into eternity. The symbol wasn't just a piece of fabric. It was history, blood, and a promise of consequences. When the patch caught the light, the room seemed to inhale all at once, as if the walls themselves knew the ending was near. Travis's last defense was humor, but his laugh came out strangled, weak. You're going to what? Teach me manners? The first angel leaned closer, his words almost a whisper, but sharp enough to pierce. No, you're going to teach yourself right now. The bar's tension tightened to the breaking point. A chair squeaked as someone shifted. The neon lights hummed outside. A motorcycle engine roared to life. Then another, then another. The sound grew, layered and deep, like a storm gathering right outside the door. Travis's eyes widened. He realized too late this wasn't just three men. It never was. The bar shook faintly as more engines revved. A chorus of loyalty arriving with thunder. The whole street was waking up, and Travis was trapped in the eye of it. And the angels weren't done yet. The sound outside grew into a rolling thunder. Dozens of engines harmonizing like a war drum. Every heartbeat inside the bar aligned with the pulse of those Harleys. Travis turned toward the windows, and for the first time, fear swallowed his arrogance whole. Clara Ara didn't move. She simply sat straighter, arms folded, watching the scene unravel. Her tattoo was no longer just ink. It was the spark that had ignited something far bigger. The first angel flicked his chin toward the door. Step outside. Travis shook his head, panic taking over. No way, I'm not walking out there. The second angel leaned in close enough that Travis could feel the heat of his breath. That wasn't a request. The crowd parted like water, and Travis stumbled forward, forced by their silent judgment. He pushed open the door, and daylight blinded him for a moment until his vision adjusted. Then he saw them. Lined along both sides of the street, row after row of chrome and leather, sat the angels. 40 bikes, 40 men, their patches burning in the sun. Engines idled low and menacing, filling the air with vibration. It wasn't chaos, it was formation, order, a brotherhood declaring its presence without saying a word. Travis's knees buckled. Oh, God. The third angel walked him down the steps like a condemned man. This is what loyalty looks like. Not the kind you buy with drinks, the kind you earn. Clara Ara stepped into the doorway, her shadows stretching across the lot. People from the bar followed, drawn by the spectacle. Every eye watched Travis shrink before the silent wall of power. Then, from the middle of the formation, one bike roared louder. A man stepped forward, broad-shouldered, long gray hair tied back, his cut heavier with patches than the rest. This was no ordinary member. He was the kind of figure whose presence didn't need introduction. He lifted his hand and the engines all cut at once. Silence hit like a hammer. Travis could barely breathe. His voice cracked. I didn't know, I swear. The leader ignored him. His gaze swept over to Clara Ara, then back to the angels at his flank. Finally, he spoke. Each word slow, deliberate. This bar belongs to respect. Tonight, a Marine showed it. One of ours stood beside it. The rest of you, he let the words hang heavy, understand what that means. The crowd from inside the bar nodded, murmuring agreement. Clara Ara's tattoo wasn't just hers anymore. It had been claimed by the loyalty of the angels. Travis tried to retreat, but two bikes revved sharply, blocking his movement. He was hemmed in every direction, sealed by chrome and steel. The leader's eyes finally settled on him. You thought humiliation made you strong, but all it did was prove you were alone. Travis's bravado collapsed completely, his shoulders sagged, his voice barely above a whisper. What? What happens now? The leader didn't answer. Instead, he turned, lifting his hand again. Engines ignited in perfect unison, 40 voices of thunder filling the street until windows rattled and the ground itself seemed to shake. The sound wasn't aimed at Travis. It was aimed at everyone watching. A message that would echo through the town long after the bikes rode away. And when they did, leaving Travis alone in the middle of the road, the silence was deafening. Clara Ara stepped past him without a glance, the eagle and globe ink catching the sun. For a moment, it looked like the tattoo itself was glowing, an emblem carried from one brotherhood to another. The bar would never forget that day, and neither would Travis. The crowd outside began to drift back inside the bar, whispers trailing in the wake of the thunder. Travis was gone, escorted down the street, vanished into the night like a shadow swallowed by firelight. To most, the story was over. A biker humiliated, a woman defended, a symbol upheld. But Clara Ara stayed on the steps, her eyes fixed not on the road, but on the man who had silenced 40 roaring engines with a single raised hand. The Angels' leader, the one who hadn't so much as flinched when her tattoo was revealed. He walked toward her slowly, each step deliberate, heavy with meaning. People hushed again, sensing something else was about to unfold. When he finally stood in front of her, his voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Where did you serve? Clara Ara met his gaze without hesitation. Fallujah, 2 tours. 3rd Battalion, a pause, a shift in the air. And then, for the first time, the leader's hardened features cracked. His voice softened. My brother was with you. He never came back. The crowd rippled, the tension cutting into something far deeper than intimidation. Clara Ara's breath caught. Who was he? The man reached into his vest and pulled out a weathered photo. Creased, faded, carried too long and too many miles of leather and sweat. He held it out. Clara Ara looked, and the memory slammed into her like a blast wave. A young Marine grinning under desert sun. She remembered his laugh, his stubborn refusal to duck when mortar alarms screamed. Her throat tightened. Daniel? The leader nodded, the weight of years pressing his shoulders. He told me once, if I ever found anyone who wore that eagle after the dust settled, I'd know they had his back. Tonight, I did. The silence was heavier now, not with fear, but with reverence. Those watching weren't seeing a confrontation anymore. They were witnessing a bridge between 2 worlds outsiders thought could never touch. A Marine's promise carried by his sister in arms. A brother's grief carried by a man who had built his own family on the road. Clara Ara's eyes burned, but no tears fell. He was a good man, the kind who'd stand for strangers. The leader slipped the photo back into his vest. So are you. And then he did something that froze even the angels behind him. He reached down, unfastened the edge of his cut, and pulled free a smaller patch. It wasn't flashy, just fabric, worn and scarred like the photo. He held it out. For Marines, it's the eagle. For us, it's this. You've earned both. Clara Ara stared at the patch. The symbol that had ended the night wasn't just a mark of intimidation. It was an invitation, a recognition, not of membership, but of respect. The line that most thought uncrossable had just been blurred by loyalty and sacrifice. The crowd leaned in, waiting to see if she would take it. Her fingers brushed the fabric, and for a heartbeat the bar held its breath all over again. She didn't put it on, not yet. But when she closed her fist around it, the message was clear. The Marine tattoo had lit the bar. The Hells Angels patch had ended it. And now together they carried something no one else in that town could understand. Clara Ara didn't slip the patch onto her jacket, but she held it with a grip so firm it looked like she was holding on to the weight of a whole war. Around her, the angels stood silently. Men known for defiance and rage now standing still as stone, watching the quiet exchange between their leader and the Marine veteran who had just upended the night. The crowd packed shoulder to shoulder near the bar's entrance didn't know what to make of it. Only minutes ago they'd braced for chaos. Blood on the floor, bikes overturned, a war between Patches and Pride. Instead, they were staring at something stranger, something they would whisper about for years, respect between tribes everyone thought were enemies. The leader nodded once, then turned to his crew. "We ride." Engines roared again, but this time they didn't thunder in menace. They rolled like a farewell, the chorus of exhaust echoing not as a warning, but as a salute. One by one, the bikes peeled off into the night, leaving behind nothing but tire marks and the faint smell of gasoline and asphalt. Inside the bar, no one spoke. Clara Ara finally walked back through the doorway, her hands still closed around the patch. The faces that turned toward her weren't mocking anymore. They carried something heavier, or the bartender who had ducked low when chaos seemed inevitable, straightened slowly and set down a glass with shaking hands. You just sent 40 Hells Angels packing." Clara Ara shook her head. "No, I didn't. A promise did." She sat at the same table where it had all begun. Her jacket still torn, the tattoo still visible under the harsh neon. People gathered close, hesitant but drawn in. One of the younger locals, barely 20, finally asked, "What happens now?" Clara Ara looked at the patch in her palm, then at the crowd. "Now you remember this? Sometimes respect is louder than violence. Sometimes loyalty crosses lines you thought were walls." Her words rippled outward as if she had drawn a line in the sawdust and dared everyone to step across it. In the following days, the story spread faster than wildfire. By morning, the bar's regulars had retold it 10 different ways. By afternoon, people from nearby towns were driving in just to see where it happened. And by the weekend, whispers of the night had reached veterans' halls and biker clubhouses alike. The Marine Corps tattoo had shocked the bar. The Hells Angels patch had ended it. Together, they had rewritten the town's memory of what strength looked like. As for Clara Ara, she didn't wear the patch. She kept it in her pocket, folded against the photo the leader had given her before he rode off. 2 symbols, 2 legacies, and one night that fused them in a way no fight ever could. Sometimes people chase legends. That night, Clara Ara became one. By sunrise, the bar looked almost ordinary again. Chairs were upright, glasses washed, the jukebox humming faintly. But the people inside it the night before knew nothing was ordinary anymore. The silence that had gripped the room hadn't faded with the rumble of exhaust. It lingered, carved deep into memory. Clara Ara walked down Main Street the next morning with her jacket zipped high, the patch tucked carefully into her pocket. She wasn't seeking attention, but whispers followed her anyway. Shopkeepers who'd once dismissed her as just another quiet face now watched her with a mix of curiosity and reverence. The town that had ignored her suddenly carried her name on its lips. At the Veterans Hall, words spread like wildfire. Men who had fought and bled in forgotten wars leaned forward, listening as one of their own recounted what he'd seen. The Marine Corps tattoo glowing in neon light. The angel standing down. The patch placed in Clarara's hand. For them, it wasn't just a story. It was validation. Proof that service still carried weight, even in a world that often forgot it. Across town, the younger crowd told it differently. To them, it was like a movie that had broken through the haze of small-town boredom. They replayed every moment. The rip of fabric, the stunned hush, the roar of bikes peeling away in unison. But even in their retelling, something more important slipped through. The realization that fear could be silenced not by fists, but by respect earned in blood and loyalty. The biker who had started it all was nowhere to be found. Some said he rode out of town before dawn, humiliated. Others claimed the angels themselves had taken him, punishing him for crossing a line even they wouldn't defend. No one knew for sure. What everyone agreed on was this: he would never show his face in that bar again. For Clara Ara, the night left more than stories. It left a weight she hadn't asked to carry. Each time she felt the patch against her side, she knew it wasn't just fabric. It was responsibility. An unspoken oath that the respect shown to her had to be honored somehow. And yet she didn't regret it. Not one bit. Because in that moment, standing in front of the entire bar, she had given every veteran, every forgotten fighter a voice again. And that was worth more than silence. Weeks passed, but the memory of that night never dimmed. The bar owner, once content to let rowdy bikers run unchecked, nailed a new sign above the door. Respect is the price of entry. Nobody laughed at it. Nobody dared. Clara Ara, though, became something she never expected. A touchstone. Strangers she'd never spoken to stopped her on the street, not to pry, but to thank her. A young waitress admitted that seeing Clara Ara stand tall had given her the courage to finally leave an abusive boyfriend. An old veteran, usually too proud to speak of his scars, sat with her one afternoon and quietly rolled up his sleeve, showing faded ink of his own unit. His voice trembling as he said, "You reminded me I still matter." Even the Hells Angels themselves lingered in the town's shadow. They didn't come roaring back through Main Street, but messages reached Clara Ara in subtle ways. A leather vest left folded on her porch one morning. A bouquet of desert roses delivered anonymously to her workplace, each a reminder that they hadn't forgotten, and that her act had written her name into their code of loyalty. But not all consequences were comfortable. There were those who whispered that Clara Ara had invited trouble, that by revealing the tattoo and holding the patch she had crossed into dangerous territory. Some avoided her out of fear that chaos might follow her steps. Clara Ara understood their unease. Still, she refused to shrink back. She carried herself a little straighter, not as a symbol of danger, but as proof that silence could be broken and respect demanded, even by someone who never sought the fight. The patch itself found a home in a frame above her kitchen table, not displayed like a trophy, but preserved like a reminder. Each time she looked at it, she remembered the quiet that had filled the bar. After the roar, the kind of silence not born of fear, but of recognition. And she promised herself she would never let that lesson fade. In time, the story of that night became legend, a cautionary tale for bikers who thought strength came from intimidation, and a beacon for veterans who wondered if anyone still cared. And for Clara Ara, it was something simpler but just as profound. The moment she realized she wasn't invisible, she was part of a legacy written in courage, stitched in loyalty, and remembered in the hush that only true respect can bring. And so the night the bar froze became more than an incident. It became a turning point, a reminder etched into the town's bones. That honor doesn't need a voice to be heard, and sometimes all it takes to change everything is one act of defiance that refuses to be forgotten. And that's the truth of what happened the night a biker tore a shirt. And the silence of respect changed everything. But here's the question I want to leave you with. How many battles are fought every day? Not with fists or blades, but with courage that refuses to stay hidden. If this story moved you, if you believe loyalty, honor, and quiet defiance are worth remembering, then this is your home. Hit subscribe to Hard Ales right now, because every week we bring you stories where ordinary people step into extraordinary moments. And silence isn't weakness, it's power. So stay with us, share this story, and tell me in the comments what would you have done if you were there in that bar. Because this isn't just a channel, it's a community. And together we'll keep these tales alive.